The year is 48C. A 15-year-old girl crosses the threshold of the Palatine Palace. White silk clings to her frame. Myrtle leaves crown her golden hair. The Senate rises. The people roar approval. Emperor Claudius, 50 years old, his left leg dragging slightly, speech caught in his throat, takes her small hand in his. His name is legend. Hers will become something else entirely. Valeria Messalina, remember it. Rome tried to forget. They expect her to save them. The blood stains from Caligula's assassination are barely scrubbed from the corridors. 4 years of madness, executions for entertainment, incest paraded as policy, a reign so unhinged that his own guards cut him down in a tunnel beneath this very palace. Rome needs stability, virtue, heirs. They dress her as salvation. Within 10 years, she will transform this palace into something the ancient sources can barely describe without trembling. Senators will become her prisoners. Aristocratic daughters will disappear into her chambers and return changed, silent, broken, bound by secrets they'll carry to their graves. She will stage contests that would shock professional prostitutes. She will orchestrate blackmail on a scale that would make modern intelligence agencies pause. She will marry another man while still empress in daylight with witnesses, as if daring Rome itself to stop her. And when they finally do, her statues will be dragged through the streets and shattered. Her name will be chiseled from every inscription. Official records will be rewritten as if she never existed. Damnio memoriali, damnation of memory. 2 zeros. 0 years later, you're still here, still listening, because the things Rome tried hardest to erase are the things we can't stop digging up. So, what happens when corruption isn't a symptom of power, but the power itself? Rewind to 38C. The Forum is alive with voices. Merchants hawking silk, senators arguing over grain, children running between columns. Rome looks invincible, but the rot is already there. Tiberius died 2 years ago, paranoid, hated, alone on Capri. Then came Caligula, 4 years of madness, executions as entertainment, a horse appointed to the Senate, senators forced to watch as he violated their wives at dinner. When the Taurian Guard finally moved, January 24th, 41C, 29 stab wounds ended it. His wife dead beside him, their infant daughter's skull smashed against a wall. Rome exhaled, then panicked. Who comes next? They find him hiding behind a curtain. Claudius, the stammering uncle. The family embarrassment with the limp and the drool. 50 years old, never wanted power, never expected it. The guard proclaims him emperor anyway, not because he's qualified, because he's alive and Rome needs someone wearing the purple before the city tears itself apart. Claudius knows he's a placeholder. He needs legitimacy, fast, an heir, a dynasty, proof the gods haven't abandoned Rome. So he marries Valeria Messalina, third cousin, 15 years old. Bloodline that traces back to Annas himself. Beauty that poets build careers describing. Pale skin, golden hair, features so perfect they look carved. She's been groomed for this. Educated in virtue, taught to lower her eyes, speak softly, embody the chastity that holds civilization together. On paper, she's perfect. The Senate approves, the people cheer, the empire has a future again. But here's the question nobody asked. What happens when you take a child and dress her as a goddess? When you place her in a palace where every door opens at her command? Where senators bow, where her husband is twice her age and terrified of losing power. When you tell her that her entire value exists in her womb and her purity, that she must be modest, obedient, chaste, a living symbol of virtue. When you hand unlimited power to someone whose only instruction is don't use it. What happens when the gap between what she's forced to be in public and what she desires in private becomes a chasm? Rome is about to find out. If this moment doesn't move you to stay and learn what happens when power meets forbidden desire, You're missing the lesson our ancestors died to teach. Because what comes next isn't just scandal. It's how empires crumble from the bedroom, not the battlefield. Before we go further, if you're drawn to documented records that history classes won't touch, hitting that like and subscribe button helps us uncover more accounts like this. Now, back to the story. The first 2 years are textbook perfect. Messalina gives Claudius a daughter, Claudia Octavia. Then a son, Britannicus, named after his father's conquest of Britain. The Senate breathes easier, the empire has heirs. She appears at state functions, draped in modest astelaire, head covered, eyes downcast. Every gesture choreographed for virtue, the perfect Roman matron. In public, she is everything Rome demands. In private, Rome has always divided its women into 2 categories: the matrona and the meretrix, the wife and the courtesan, the sacred and the profane. One lives in the atrium, raises children, guards family honor. The other lives in the lupanar, the brothel, where men shed civilization like a cloak. The system works because these categories never touch. Messalina decides to be both. The first whisper comes around 42C. A senator returns late from Ostia. Business ran long. He's in Rome for the night. On impulse, he visits the Sabura, Rome's red light district. Narrow streets that smell like piss and cheap wine. Cramped insula where oil lamps burn low, and you can disappear into the dark. He chooses a room, pays his coin. The woman enters. Dark wig, heavy coals smudged around her eyes. Perfume trying too hard. Myrrh and roses covering something that smells expensive. She turns toward him. Their eyes meet. He recognizes the Empress of Rome. Not a look-alike, not a rumor. Her, according to Tacitus, yes. Writing decades later, yes, with his own agenda, but with access to palace insiders. This wasn't once. Messalina allegedly adopted the working name Lysa and became a regular at a brothel run by a woman named Scylla. Not for money, not from desperation, for the thrill of it. Think about the psychology. Every client who didn't recognize her became an unwitting accomplice. Every man who did became someone she owned, because what's he going to do? Report the Empress to whom? She's not just breaking rules. She's weaponizing the hypocrisy that built them, because Roman morality was always performance. Senators kept mistresses. Generals visited brothel. Married men slept with slaves, and nobody blinked. But women, especially aristocratic women, especially the Empress, were supposed to be above desire. Marble statues, breeding vessels, symbols. Messalina looked at that cage and walked out the door. She would return before dawn, remove the wig, wash away the cheap perfume, dress in imperial silk, attend the morning sacrifice to Vesta, goddess of chastity, with the same serene expression she wore the night before, as if nothing happened, but the brothel was just the laboratory. The real operation happened inside the palace. Picture the banquets. Rome's elite sprawled on silk couches around low tables. Golden platters heaped with roasted dormice brushed in honey. Wine flowing from jeweled cups. Senators making small talk. Generals discussing Britain, very Roman, very civilized. Until Messalina gives a signal. The servants leave. The doors close. New guests arrive. Gladiators still smelling of the arena. Sand, blood, sweat. Actors from the theater, foreign captives. Sometimes the teenage sons of patrician families, summoned under the pretense of discussing their fathers' careers. What happens next the sources describe with horror and fascination. Forced performances, humiliating contests. Senators paired with their political enemies and told to entertain the Empress. Aristocratic women married, respectable, terrified, coerced into playing the prostitute while their husbands watch from across the room, frozen. Refusal isn't an option. A tribune declines her invitation. 3 days later, he's floating in the Tiber. A nobleman tries to leave early. His family loses their estate by week's end. The message spreads. The Empress does not accept no. Then comes the contest. The story appears in Ply the Elder. Yes, he's writing about natural history, but this detail stuck. A competition between the Empress and a famous prostitute named Scylla, not for money, for pride, who could outlast more partners in a single night. 25. Messalina won. Ply writes it down like he's documenting a solar eclipse with clinical horror and fascinated precision. True, exaggerated propaganda. We'll never know for certain, but the story survived because it captured something Romans couldn't articulate. A woman wielding sexual power not as submission but as dominance. Rome didn't have language for that. So, they turned it into myth. But myths don't come from nowhere. They reflect something that happened, something people witnessed and couldn't forget, even when they tried. The palace becomes a theater of power where humiliation is currency, where senators arrive at dawn to beg favors and leave at midnight, having performed acts they'll never speak of again, where aristocratic families send their daughters into the Empress's chambers and pray they return unmarried. Most do, some don't. Nobody asks questions because by now everyone understands the system. Messalina doesn't just wield power. She collects it piece by piece, person by person, building a network of complicity so vast that nobody can move against her without destroying themselves. Every participant becomes a prisoner. Every witness becomes an accomplice. She doesn't need the Senate's approval. She has their shame. That's better than loyalty. Loyalty can shift. Shame lasts forever, and through it all, Claudius works. Building aqueducts, reforming courts, expanding the empire into Britain. The competent emperor everyone underestimated. Does he know? Of course he knows. Rome is gossiping. Senators are whispering. His own freedmen are begging him to act. But what can he do? She's the mother of his heirs. Moving against her means admitting he's been cuckolded before the entire empire. It means civil war. It means proving every critic right that he was always too weak to control his own house. So he does what powerful men have done throughout history when faced with unbearable truth. He looks away, works harder, pretends the rot isn't spreading until 48 CE, 10 years after their marriage. The year everything ends, it's autumn. Claudius is in Ostia overseeing Rome's grain supply, critical work. The city survives on Egyptian wheat, and any disruption means riots. He's doing his job being the competent administrator Rome needs. Meanwhile, in Rome, Messalina is getting married again to Gaius Silius, consul designate, one of the most powerful senators in Rome. Young, handsome, ambitious, everything Claudius isn't. But here's the detail that breaks your brain. She doesn't hide it. This isn't an affair in the shadows. This is a public wedding ceremony with witnesses, with contracts, with formal vows while still married to the emperor. The ancient sources describe it with stunned precision. Tacitus writes about the disbelief, the frozen moment when Rome's elite watched the empress take another husband in broad daylight, as if the rules simply didn't apply to her anymore. Was it a power play, a coup attempt? Did she think Claudius was too weak to respond? Did Silius believe he could replace the emperor through marriage? Or had Messalina reached the point where transgression itself was the goal, where the thrill came not from secrecy, but from daring Rome to stop her? We don't know her thoughts, we only know her actions, and Rome, corrupt, compromised, exhausted Rome, finally found its limit. Narcissus, Claudius's most trusted freedman, hears the news first. He rushes to Ostia, finds the emperor reviewing grain ledgers. Picture that conversation. How do you tell an emperor his wife just married someone else? How do you make him believe it when it sounds impossible? But the reports keep coming, senators confirming it, witnesses stepping forward now that someone's finally asking questions. The detail that seals it, the marriage contract was signed. Legal, witnessed, undeniable. The laughter dies. Picture his face in that moment. the emperor everyone mocked, the stammering scholar, the man who survived by being underestimated, cuckolded publicly, legally, while he was ensuring Rome didn't starve. The rage that comes isn't hot. It's cold, final. He returns to Rome with the Taurian guard at his back. They find her in the gardens of Lucullis, sprawling estate on the edge of the city, trees imported from across the empire, fountains that never stop flowing. The place where she'd hosted so many of her rebels. She's with her mother, Lepida. The older woman is begging her daughter to act, to run, to do something. But Messalina seems frozen. Some sources say she tried to write a petition for mercy. Others say she just stood there, unable to believe it was ending, that after 10 years of bending Rome to her will, Rome had finally bent back. The soldiers arrive, she recognizes them. She's seen them at the palace, maybe even summons some of them to her villa. Now they're here for her. She drops to her knees, begs, pleads, offers her children. Octavia and Britannicus, 9 and 7 years old, has hostages. Anything, everything, the soldiers don't respond. Orders are orders. She reaches for a dagger, someone's. Maybe her mother's, maybe a guard's. Her hand shakes. She presses the blade to her own throat. Can't do it. A tribune steps forward. His name was never recorded, but his action was. He drives the blade home. Valeria Messalina Augusta, Empress of Rome, dies at 25 years old in a pool of blood on the grass where she once held power over senators. Claudius orders damnatio memoriali, damnation of memory. Her statues are dragged through the streets and shattered. Her name is chiseled from every inscription. Official records are rewritten as if she never existed. The message she never happened, but 2 zeros, 0 years later, we're still talking about her. You've just witnessed the moment an empress fell. Not to war, not to plague, but to the consequences of power without limits. If stories like this remind you why history must be remembered, not erased, subscribe to Crimson Historians. Because the past doesn't stay buried, it echoes. The Roman Forum still stands, the Colosseum draws millions, but the bitter Palatine Hill where emperors lived, where Messalina ruled, is mostly rubble now. Tourists walk past broken columns and crumbling walls, snapping photos, reading plaques about Augustus and Nero. They don't realize they're standing in the rooms where she held her rebels. Claudius remarried within months. His niece, Agrena the Younger, she was smarter than Messalina, more patient. She would eventually poison Claudius and install her son Nero as emperor, beginning another cycle of madness. Messalina's children suffered fates almost as tragic as hers. Her daughter Octavia was forced to marry Nero, her step-brother. He later had her executed, claiming adultery. She was 22, the same age her mother died. Her son Britannicus was poisoned at 14, likely by Nero. To eliminate any rival claim to the throne, he collapsed during a dinner party, dead before anyone could move. The Senate pretended Messalina never existed, but the soldiers remembered. The servants remembered the families whose daughters disappeared into her villa and came back silent. They remembered, here's what haunts me about her story. How much of what we know about Messalina is true? Our sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, were all men, all writing decades after her death, all with political motives to paint her as a monster. Roman propaganda had a pattern. Powerful women who threatened male authority were always accused of sexual depravity. Cleopatra, Agrena, Livia, Messalina, the playbook never changed. Does that mean she was innocent? Number. The marriage to Silius happened. That's documented even by her defenders. The political corruption was real. The blackmail system existed. People died who opposed her. But the brothel stories, the contests, the specific numbers, we'll never know where the truth ends and the propaganda begins. What we do know is this. A 15-year-old girl was married to a man in his 50s. She was told her entire value existed in her purity and her womb. She was given immense power, but no education in how to wield it. no guidance, no purpose beyond bearing heirs and looking virtuous. And when she found a way to feel powerful through transgression, through control, through turning Rome's own sexual hypocrisy against itself, the empire that created her destroyed her, then spent 0 years calling her a monster. Stand in the ruins of the Palatine today, and you can feel something in the air. Not ghosts. Rome doesn't do hauntings like that, but something heavier. The weight of stories that couldn't be silenced, even when they chiseled away the names. Because here's the truth about Damnatio Memoriale, it doesn't work. You can smash the statues, scratch out the inscriptions, rewrite the records, but you can't erase the lessons. Messalina's name was meant to disappear. Instead, it became immortal. Not because Rome wanted her remembered, but because the truth, however twisted, however buried, has a way of clawing back to the surface. Empires have fallen to barbarian invasions, to plague, to economic collapse. But Rome teaches us something more insidious. They can also rot from within. Messalina's story isn't just about sex or scandal. It's about what happens when power becomes a game. When shame becomes currency, when the people meant to lead an empire are too compromised to stop its decay. Every senator she humiliated stayed silent. Every general she blackmailed remained loyal. Every witness to her rebels became an accomplice. Not through loyalty, through shame. She proved that you don't need an army to control men. You just need to know what their afraid people will discover. We like to think we're different now, that we've evolved past the corruption of Rome. But look at any modern empire, any government, any institution of power. How many secrets are keeping it together? How many people stay silent because exposure would destroy them? How much of what we call stability is just shared complicity? Messalina's ghost doesn't haunt the Palatine. It haunts every palace where power and shame sleep in the same bed. Marcus Aurelius wrote something 100 years after Messalina died. He was emperor, then trying to make sense of Rome's endless cycles of virtue and corruption. Look beneath the surface. Let neither the true quality nor the worth of a thing escape you. He was thinking about leaders like her, people whose surfaces gleamed while their cores rotted. But he might as well have been warning us, because the lesson isn't that Messalina was uniquely evil. The lesson is that Rome created her, married her off at 15, gave her power without purpose, then destroyed her when she used that power in ways that exposed their hypocrisy. Her name was erased. Her story survived. And 0 years later, we're still trying to understand what it means when the people given power to preserve virtue become the architects of its destruction. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths, a story Rome tried to bury but couldn't. If accounts like this remind you how fragile empires are, how power corrupts in ways we'd rather not see, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and help keep the past alive. Because the moment we forget these lessons is the moment we're doomed to repeat.